NC State, University of Illinois, and many others. He has been featured on many radio and television interviews, published articles. He's a father of 3 and has served his CC community in Marietta as a challenge director for 4 years. If you have never heard Jay speak, he is a delight. He kind of does this for a living, so he's very good at it. But if you have heard him speak before, new topic, same Jay, it's going to be excellent. So as soon as he walks in, we will go ahead and get started. Again, you will not see me again until 10:30. Both myself and Cindy Diffall will be in here, and Cindy is our new product support specialist, which is previously known as the bookstore. Yes, so we are now a resource center. If you haven't seen it, if you haven't been to a Practicum yet, CC has restructured it. It is not this mammoth thing that you are accustomed to having. There is just 1 or 2 of everything for you to be able to lay hands on, and then we are going to ship it to you like Amazon does within 3 days. So it's a very cool system. Shipping is free while you are at Practicum for those first 3 days. I know Cindy will go over some of that with you guys as well, but bookstore, resource center, products sales specialist, bookstore rep, they're all very similar, just a revamped version. So, Jay, we are ready for you.
Yeah.
Thank you all, ladies.
All right. It's kind of weird, right?
I
All right. Hey, how's everybody doing today?
Great.
Hi, y'all are my last practicum of the year, which is exciting, so I'll finish strong. If I don't, keep it to yourself, because my ego is fragile. Okay, so we are, it's interesting, they're very tolerant of me. Everybody's very lovely. They're very tolerant of my eccentricities. Thank you so much. And one of the things they do is that because for those of you who don't know me, I have a ministry. For the last 10 or 15 years, I've traveled around the country talking about bioethics and value of human life, publishing articles, stuff like that. But I started a new organization this year, and so they sent me the slides so that I would know what I'm supposed to talk about, and they gave me sort of an overview about how they wanted me to approach this, with the idea, obviously, of multiple goals. For me, I'll tell you the primary goal that I have for the next 3 days. It is not to cover the slides. I have very little interest in PowerPoint presentations. And so I may actually, we're going to try to get some of them up that are helpful, and I'll communicate with them to do the best that we can to get things that I think will help you out on the screen. If they're not there, it's really not that big of a deal, because my main goal over the next 3 days is to be an encouragement to you. To inform you, for those of you who are new to this, if anybody is, for those of you who have been doing this for a long time, to try to help you re-energize, refocus, remember why we're here, to get clarity on why we teach certain ages a certain way. As we discuss math or bring it in, math is sort of an extra aspect of what we're talking about. I know it's the theme of the year. You know, we always have a theme, right? And math is the theme of the year, and I'm happy about that because I love math. And so over the next couple of days, too, I'm going to try my best to encourage you, for those of you in this room who hate math, not to pass your hatred of math on to your kids. Yes. Give them the opportunity to learn to hate it on their own if that's the path they're going to be on. But I absolutely adore math, and I love it. I think it gives us many opportunities to see things that they wouldn't otherwise see. As we walk through the steps of the beginning or basics learning math and go through the next stage of development where we're going to dialectic and learning to use different aspects of it to creatively in cooperation with each other, all the way up to the place of rhetorical, I want to encourage you as well that love of math, if we can foster it in them and us, for those of us who might have learned it wrong when we were younger, can actually help us, because we live in a world increasingly where we have no idea how the world that we live in works. The overwhelming majority of people have no idea how the technology that they're using, holding, and everything that governs their lives actually works. I know this because I talk to people all over the country, and I spent the last year with a bunch of Challenge 4 students teaching them physics, and what I found out was that they live in a world that was completely mysterious to them. But math helped them, the math of physics, understanding, and they started to learn how the electricity that comes into their house works. They had to learn how their car works, how many boats are ever in work, how planes work, how elevators work. All of these were things that were like unveiling this grand mystery to them, but it made their life easier. It makes more sense. So that's another aspect of what I want to do this week. Not just encourage, but for the next 3 days, I want to make this process of homeschooling make sense to us all again. I will say things that you'll hear me say them multiple times. And one of the things that I say a lot is, this is not magic, but it is hard work. So there's nothing magical about homeschooling. There's nothing magical about what you've set yourself to doing. There's nothing magical about what you're in the midst of, but it is hard work. And you can't miss that, because hard work has a cost. Oftentimes it's energy, right? Oftentimes it's our emotional condition, our state. There's frustration. All of these things are to be expected because we've set ourselves to something hard. But what they sent me, I thought was interesting, because they get feedback from speakers. They'll call me up and ask me, what did you think about the slide presentation we gave you this year? And I told them something a couple of years ago after I got done speaking. I said, what I don't like is that you buried the 5 common topics later in it. Because what I have learned, I did Challenge B for multiple years. And then last year I moved up to Challenge 4. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, why I did that later in the week. But having done both of those areas, I can tell you that I thought, and I told them, that I have learned, and after that first year, going into my second year, by the time I was in my 3rd year of Challenge B, I would tell everybody who asked me, what changed from the first year to the second year to the 3rd year? If you feel like you're getting better, why are you getting better? As I would talk to other directors, and I would tell them all the same thing. I learned to value the 5 common topics more every single year and every time I work with students. And so I begged them, don't bury the 5 common topics later, let's hit them right away. And then when they sent me the slide presentation, they are right there. The first slide, dropped like a bomb in the middle of the presentation with no context or circumstances around it, is the 5 common topics. And this made me happy, because that's where we're going to start this week. We're going to start this week discussing the 5 common topics. Why? Because they are your lifeline in homeschooling. Not just that, they are the key to understanding the process of education, familiarizing yourself with the world. Research, articulation, rhetoric, discussion. Well, these are keys and components to everything, not just for your child in your home today. There are elements that we're going to discuss over the next few minutes of the 5 common topics that I use in my job. I use in how I dialogue with people on university campuses. I use how I write articles for magazines. I'm in the middle. I thought I was past a deadline. I was up late last night trying to finish an article for a Christian research journal. And then when I sent them a note this morning telling them I was sorry that I fell asleep during my last edits and I didn't finish, they sent me back one that said, you're not due for 10 more days. We're not worried about it. So I caused, just that's a lesson for us in homeschooling. I caused myself a bunch of unnecessary stress last night, but it is somehow not less stressful that I have 10 more days to get it done. But I use the 5 common topics. Now I don't call them that, but they are basically just thought disciplines. They're an organized way of taking on all subjects. They're a way to inspire or motivate the people we work with. So we're going to go through them, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as we launch into the next 3 days. That this is, at core, what we're going to do at every level with every group of kids we work with, whether they're our kids, whether they're in community. Now, here's another thing you need to know. Wait, they cheated. Don't put that up there. I was going to make you tell me what they were. All right. Well, warning, you got off easy that time. Oh, they took it away now. It's like magic. Great. Okay, so I'm going to ask you questions this week. And they're not questions that, I don't want you to answer. If I ask questions, my expectation is you're going to respond and answer. And I'm going to have several points where the audience is going to be driving a lot of the conversation. So first, if you didn't see it up there, I want them in order. What is the first of the 5 common topics?
Definition.
Definition, great. What is definition? For today, where we're going to be focusing on grammar kids the most, we're going to be discussing young kids that at this early stage of development, They're looking to define the world around them. They really can't do a lot. Their brains haven't developed to such a point that they're capable of very sophisticated thought. But what they can do is get a lot of definitions. They're like empty vessels. Because they're not in any way distracted by how other things relate to each other, and they have a one-to-one relationship with all of that data in the world around them, you can give them a ton of data. Because that's all their brain does well. But it does it at a remarkable rate. And definition, it means that we help them define the world around us. What's this? What's that? If they see two different things, we give them clarity on definitions so they can understand the difference between those two things. If there's some verbal ambiguity when they're trying to figure out, like the whole there problem that everybody goes through, we help them to understand the different definitions of the different theirs. When we talk about math, we talk about numbers, the difference between numbers and numerals, the difference between addition and subtraction. We're just giving them groundwork, definitions. And this, as I said, comes up in the area where I work in Christian apologetics, where we're talking to. There's a guy by the name of Greg Kokel. Greg Kokel runs an organization called Stand to Reason. Stand to Reason is an apologetics, probably one of the flagship apologetics organizations in Christianity over the last 30 years. And Greg Kokel wrote a book called Tactics. There are very few books in this world that I tell every person that I meet, if you have not read that book, you should read Tactics. But this is one of them. The reason I tell people that is because the entire point of Tactics is to teach you and anybody else who reads it how to have a conversation with somebody else about morally important issues that would otherwise be divisive. Difficult things for you to talk about. Talking about your faith with people. Talking about issues that I talk about. The value of human life. An edge of life on either way. The beginning and end of life. And when life is taken. All of these things are things that we must engage in our culture. And that we must engage most importantly with our own kids. To be able to have conversations with them and talk to them. And what Greg says is that we have to, rather than immediately try to tell everybody all of what we think or to give our side on things, what we want to do is ask particular questions. And the first question that he got, the first tactical question he approaches, is what do you mean by that? What Greg is saying is that before we move forward in any conversation, we must have clear definitions. And our children are exactly the same. We have to give them definitions of the world in which they live so they can start to understand what each and everything in the world that they're operating in is. And they want to know. They're interested in knowing. And driving them back towards that before they get too far down the line. You'll see this, for example, like let's say I'll be somewhere speaking and somebody I'll have a conversation with afterwards and they'll say, well, I just don't believe in God. Okay. Well, I could immediately try to explain to them why I believe in God. That would be one way to go about it. And that would probably be less, as Abby Murray and Robbie Zacharias told me the other day, Robbie Zacharias International Ministries, that would be less the work of apologetics, of answering the question they asked, and more the art of making them sorry they asked. Because I would just overwhelm them with information that they didn't need and it wasn't pertinent to what was going on, with no idea who I'm actually talking to at this moment. Or I can do something else that I often do. When they say I don't believe in God, I say, what do you mean when you say God? How do you define God? What is your definition of the word God? Because I feel fairly confident that once you tell me what you mean when you say God, that I don't believe in that God either. That we're probably not even talking about the same thing when you say God and I say God. And most arguments, by the way, online are like that. I watch people. I will not engage in arguments online. I have to tell the audience when I speak at universities and I have students come up and say, can I friend you on Facebook? But I love Facebook friends. I'm really, really happy about everybody being my Facebook friend. Do not tag me in your stupid arguments. I have no interest in jumping in to bail you out of the problems you get yourself into. And one time I watched two people that I had met having some argument online in the comment threads, and neither one of them had the slightest idea what they were talking about. And I was reading, I was like, why are y'all so angry at each other, hating and yelling at each other? As near as I can tell, neither one of you has any information at all. You're just like raging online with nobody knowing what they're talking about except that you hate each other. That's the only thing I can see for certain that's coming out of all of this. And so getting clear definitions, and we should do this with our kids that we work with, that we're trained, no matter what age they are, go back and ask them, what do you mean when you say this word? Do you know what this word means? Are you aware of what you're saying? Do you have clear definitions on what you're studying? Don't get so ahead of yourself. We have to do the foundational work first. And whether or not it's our littlest kids, where it's almost all we're doing is working on this very early stuff, or whether it's our older kids with the Challenge 4 guys, I would make them give me definitions first. Before we start to talk about it, make sure we understand what it is that we're talking about. That's the first thing we do in formal debate, is agree on definitions. The next one, what's next? Definition and then comparison. All right, comparison again. This is a basic foundational thing. As a matter of fact, you'll see some overlap in the 5 common topics. We can define by comparison. We can get limited definitions by comparison, right? This is Coke. I love Coke. Coke is nature's most perfect drink. It is a gift from God, and I am grateful for it every day of my life. And when I go up to the Northeast, and I'm speaking up in those areas, and I go to restaurants, and they say, do you have Coke? And they say, yeah, we do. And I say, okay, I like a Coke. And then they say this, well, what we actually have is Pepsi, but is that okay? And they say, no, it's not, because I'll help you with a definition by comparison. Coke is God's most perfect creation outside of Christ, and Pepsi is a vile, disgusting swill that ought to be expunged from the human experience. They're not the same. This is a comparison for you. This is perfect mix of bitter and sweet, and Pepsi is sugary and nasty, disgusting stuff. They're not, they are different, and by that difference, I can tell you, Pepsi minimally is not Coke. And that gives us some clarity. That gives us a definition. Just like when I talk to my kids, and we have discussions about what kind of apples we're going to have in the house. I like Granny Smith apples. I like green, sour, hard, crunchy apples. My daughters like disgusting, red, squishy, sweet apples. And all I know when they buy the wrong apples is, those aren't my apples. And I don't want those. And we can define by comparison. We can also learn other things by comparison. Our kids can look at something and say, is this like that? In what ways are they like each other? In what ways are they different? They see this and ask these questions from a very young age anyway. It's natural to their thought process. They get different ideas, different definitions. They experience different things. They interact with different things. And then they see them and say, how are these things alike? How are these things different? And so that's a way that we can help guide them through them, draw them into that. I do that with the older guys as well. When they would bring things in and they would talk about a subject matter, because we are, and what we'll talk about again more later, in classroom conversation, we never leave anything behind. We're always adding information. I bring stuff up from the past and say compare it to that which we're studying today. So we never let it die. We never let it, we're not leaving it in the past. We're always bringing it back. And let's get some comparison. Let's get some view of what makes those things similar, what makes them the same, and what makes them different. And all together. All right, so what's the third one then? Definition, comparison. Circumstances, right? Circumstances are what's going on around this. That is one of the things I find fascinating. For example, when I work with the Challenge B students, we read books, or they read short stories, and they would come in, and I would ask them the first time they sat down with me to talk to me, did you read the book? Yes. Do you have notes? Yeah, if they did have notes that were sufficient, yes. But then the first thing I would ask, who wrote this? And they would give me the author's names. Why did they write it? Do you know? What was going on when they wrote it? Nothing. Can you tell me something about the author? No. Next time they come around, we would go through, do you have the notes? You're prepared to talk? Do you have everything ready? Yeah. Who wrote this? What do you know about them? What do you know about the circumstances of it coming into existence? By the third time I ask that question, if they don't have an answer, I start getting a little frustrated. I've asked you twice. It's obviously important for you to start to think about this. Why did they write it at all? Something happened to bring this into existence. Was it that they're philosophically bent a certain way? Was it something going on in their life? Was there trauma? There's circumstances for all sorts of things. I think an interesting example of this recently was that I saw online that, and I mean this, and I find this upsetting. I don't mean to make light of it, but that I saw that Adele was getting a divorce. And then a friend of mine immediately commented, this is a terrible thing. We're about to get a great album, though. Because Adele is driven by this, right? If you listen to her music, her pain comes out. Gwen Stefani, we talk about this with my kids, and her first, when she was singing for No Doubt, that first great album that No Doubt has is like multiple songs of her railing against one of her band members that they had broken up with. And like every song is how you hurt me or you devastated me or crushed me. It's like, that must have been an interesting concert for him to have to play over and over and over again. Just playing song after song about how he hurt her, but he drove the creation of it. The circumstances of our lives drives the creation of different things, and the authors we read are no different. There's a reason they wrote the things that they did. Another place we see circumstances come into effect, if for those of you who have been a part of classical conversations, especially Essentials and Foundations, you are no doubt very familiar with the Timeline song. Now, full disclosure, I hate the Timeline song. I see its value. I genuinely do. But man, I hate it. Because I just hear it as like the soundtrack of my life for several year period there. And it wasn't just like in the house with them singing, because they put it on my phone. I could be driving down the road like shuffling my iPod, and then all of a sudden the Timeline song starts. I was talking to a guy on the phone, a surgeon in Michigan, and he and I were reviewing the most recent medical findings on a particular subject before I did an interview and a debate on television, and we were going over things, and he's talking to me, and this guy is just a brilliant medical doctor, and he's going through all of this different studies and giving me stuff to talk about, and as I'm listening to him, I finally said, "Rich, could you stop for a second?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "What's going on?" I said, "Is that the Timeline song in the background?" He said, "You know the Timeline song?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Yeah, my kids are doing it in the background right now." I was like, "Yeah, that's I don't know what to say, man." And then he starts singing the part that they were doing at that point. But the circumstance is important, because when we were in Challenge B and we were going through the history of scientists, we put a timeline up on the board. And so we're keeping not just a timeline of when the scientific discoveries are going on that we were researching at the time, but all of the other events that the kids could tell me were happening around that, so we could get some circumstances, some context of what was happening. Why these scientific inventions now? What was happening in the world to drive this at that moment? And the way invariably they filled in that timeline was all of my Challenge B students would start to sing together the Timeline song so that they could understand the circumstances that all of this happened. And my 16 and 14-year-old students still do that. My kids still go back to the Timeline song oftentimes to figure out when things happened in history. It gave them a great scope of history, a great scope and ability to understand the whole broader context, and that gives them circumstances, why things happen when they happen. So we have definition, comparison, circumstances, and then relationship. How are things related to each other? Now this is interesting because relationship is something that's harder for young kids. This is really beyond them at the point we're talking about today, the grammar kids. They have a hard time understanding relationships. I'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow. But at base, like the idea, I can teach them as a point of knowledge that my wife's brother is their uncle, right? So they can understand by definition that Uncle Jason is also Mommy's brother. They can grasp, so that if you ask them back, who is Uncle Jason? That's Mommy's brother. The same way they can say, who is Nana or Mimi or Grumpus? Mommy or Daddy's parents. Because they've learned that as a data point, but they don't get it. They don't really understand all that entails. That comes later. They cannot possibly understand it. Right? My youngest at 10 is just moving into that place where these are starting to become a reality. Relationships are becoming real. She's starting to be able to see those things. And my wife pulled out a picture of me recently when I was in my mid-20s. And I guess I had the long hair. And she showed it back. And it's like, look, this is Daddy when she was 20. My daughter's response was like classic moving into the dialectic place. She looked at it for a second. And she said, wait a minute. You guys were really younger at one point. I mean, that's a real thing, right? It's not, and you can see the wheels turning in her head. It's like, wait a second, you really were and are just normal people. And just like me at some point in the past, you were young. And that's something that comes, those relationships are something they just can't understand when they're younger. They have a one-to-one relationship with information, but they can't go beyond that. But our older students can. And so we can ask them those questions. How do these things relate to each other? What is the relationship that they share? How are they connected? In what way does this fuel that? Because none of our disciplines, as we'll talk about today, operate in isolation from the other. How does philosophy inform science? How does science change history? How do politics impact other aspects of our life? Those relationships, and then the people that are related with each other. The fascinating ways that you can see the connections to different people and recognize, for example, as I've talked to my own kids, it's like, look at the first few presidents of the United States. I mean, it's a very bizarre set of circumstances that happened there. You have George washington, who could have been king of the United States if he wanted to, but from Virginia. And then you have John Adams from Massachusetts, and then you have 3 Virginians in a row, all 3 friends, all 3 who hung out with each other, all 3 from the same political party, and then the next is from Massachusetts, and he's not just from the same state as John Adams, he's John Adams' son, John Quincy Adams. The isolation of power at the very beginning of our country, if you understand the relationship that they shared between all of them, is an interesting facet of the founding of our country. As much as we believe ourselves to be this wide, array of all power can be shared equally and anybody can come up with that is true, the possibility does exist. As the country was founded, it was consolidated a very small number of people with a very small understanding of the world that they lived in, to the point that by the time Andrew Jackson shows up, and he's not from one of those places, there is a lot of personal... I love it when people talk about, modern politics is so awful and so terrible. Those first few... If you go back and read the political writings of those first few elections, they were terrible. Thomas Jefferson was awful, and his friend Benjamin Franklin Bates, who ran the paper that he was using, they were just awful the way they attacked John Adams. John Quincy Adams was nasty about the stupid hick Andrew Jackson and made it very clear that he thought he was illiterate and that it was not fit for the office of presidency, to which Andrew Jackson, my favorite response of all time to the charge of illiteracy and not being able to spell, was, and I'm going to censor it a little bit, he just said it's a dang poor mind that can't think of more than one way to spell a word. I was like, awesome response to the charge of illiteracy. I can figure out multiple ways to spell a word. I'm more creative than you are. But the relationship's important for them to understand the world. And then finally, testimony. Testimony would probably be, to me, the most overlooked of all of them. Not in the sense of how we do history and we look for testimony, which is important, by the way. There are times today where we are talking about things that happened in the past, and we are changing why they happened or the motivations for those things to fit a more modern narrative. And the answer to those oftentimes is to go back and find out what was the testimony of the people that lived when it was actually happening. I can tell you multiple instances where that happened. One time I remember a very protracted discussion with a group of people at work when I worked about the causes of the Civil War as we discussed it. And they were very complex causes and all this stuff. And they were going on. I was like, well, yeah, all of that's true, but slavery was at the heart of it. And then like states' rights, states' rights to do what? And we kept having conversations. So finally, I was like, let's go back and read the original documents. Look at what the sermons were about. Look at what the editorials were about. Look at what people were writing, all the publishing, the books. What were they talking about in their speeches? Because people gave a lot of speeches back then because they didn't have TV. So they would go out and give speeches and people would gather and listen to them. And they would have open debates and forums so they would discuss things. And when they had politicians that were running for office, if you go read Neil Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death, you will see that the way that they handled politics back then was if you had 2 different candidates running for some office that impacted your community, those candidates would come to their community and they would spend hours telling you what they believe and how it will affect their governing, and then they would spend hours answering questions from the community. That's how well informed the electorate was back then. As a matter of fact, if there was an 8-hour period where you would be engaging 2 candidates running for one office and there was a dinner break in the middle of that, everybody went home and had dinner and everyone came back. The last presidential debate, when we had the first initial debate, when there was like 15 Republicans on stage in 2015, the average time that a candidate talked was somewhere in the neighborhood of like 90 seconds. Think about the difference that we're talking about there as far as what those people understood about the candidates they had in front of them versus what we're capable of understanding about the candidates we have today. But we can look back because those people wrote about what was going on and the testimony they left behind, and we can know what they said. And then we can go back and say, look, whatever it is you're saying, they're talking about slavery an awful lot. So it's not that it's the only cause, but let's get away from the idea of trying to minimize its importance, because the people who lived in that time were talking about it a lot. In their churches, in their editorials, in their novels, in their speeches, in their debates, in their campaigns, in their elections. It was there front and center. Another thing we can see that is like first century Judaism, where we were told forever that the Bible gave an inaccurate picture of what happened in first century Judaism. They're like, that's not the way first century Israel was. And then we found the Dead Sea Scrolls, and we were able to see from their testimony what the people who lived in that time said about the time that they lived in. And what we found out, to our utter astonishment, was that the writers of the Bible who actually lived in that time seemed to understand first century Israel better than historians that were writing about it 2,000 years later. That they knew the world that they lived in, and they were communicating accurately about the things that they were seeing and the way the culture was. Testimony tells us something. One of the reasons that almost every news story that you read today is wrong, and that's true. Almost every news story. I'm not talking about fake news. I'm talking about all news. All of it. Almost everything that you read, if some event has happened, is wrong. And do you know why? There is not enough time between the time the event happens and trying to get you information for them to collect enough testimony to weigh the different testimonies, line them up, and see what actually happened. And so you and I and every one of us are fed a false narrative about what's going on in the world around us because we can't find out the truth until things have taken a lot more time to get to us. That's what we get from testimony. I don't just need your version of events. I need someone else's versions of events. I need to get 100 people's versions of events, and then I need to see whose lines up and how it all comes out and what actually happened. And that takes a long time. But we can go beyond that too. When I was doing a Challenge B a couple of years ago, we were reading a short story, and I asked them about what does the story tell us about a particular character. And when I asked that question, what every kid in my class heard was, what does the author directly say through his writing about the nature of this character? And they said, he just doesn't talk about that character very much. I said, he doesn't. Look at what the other characters are saying. Are the other characters talking about this at all? And they all looked, and they said, okay. If we collect what the other characters are saying, we start to get a picture of this character, a different picture of this character. And they were able to move through it. Testimony isn't just what people are saying in history, it's what within a narrative story other characters are saying, because the author wrote that too. He doesn't just, he or she doesn't just write the parts where I directly describe somebody. They write the parts where one character talks about another, and you can learn something about that testimony. So definition, comparison, circumstances, relationship, and testimony. These are so critical that when every time I have a group that brings me subpar work, and it happens all the time. In Challenge B, Challenge 4, no matter what you're working on, your kids will do garbage work. And oddly enough, they all seem to coordinate it. It's like a virus that gets caught that week, and everybody brings in garbage work at the exact same time. And my answer to that every time is, next week, when you bring me what you bring me, and every week hereafter, I have to see evidence written on a page so that I can see it to evaluate it, to show me that you have interacted with every single one of the 5 common topics with this subject matter. I need to see definition, comparison, circumstances, relationship, testimony. I need to see that you identified it, that you wrote it down, that you thought about it. I need to see all of that in front of me so that I can understand that you have actually interacted with material in the way that you're supposed to. Because that is scholarly work. That's the exact same thing that I'm still doing today. That will serve them well all the way through as they understand how to tackle any subject matter as they advance through education. Being able to see the responsibility to get definitions, to see comparison, draw in from the circumstances why things are happening, identify the different relationships between people there and other places, and look and identify testimony both externally and internal to the works that they're evaluating. Those 5 common topics will set them up for success. Not just with what you're doing, but with everything they'll be asked to do after this. It's the place that we launch from because homeschooling is a difficult thing to do. There is a slide with some doors on it. Can we find the slide with doors on it? Who's got the control of the slide anyways? It's like mysterious. I don't see anybody back there, but things change. That's wild. Raise your hand. Who's doing it? Oh, somebody's up there? Okay. Oh, there you are. Okay, I see you now. There was a reflection in front of you. That was freaking me out. It's like it's a magic box. So the doors, right? One of the things, I had the opportunity to speak in England last year, and we had a budget for the trip. And we all of a sudden one day, right when we were buying the plane tickets, Delta offered a half-price sale. And so my wife and I were sitting around talking about it. I was like, you know, what this means is that the ticket price was just half. And I have a budget to pay for the plane tickets, which means I can get two. So I can take somebody to England with me. And so we decided to take my then 15-year-old son with me. And so he got to go, and I went to Oxford, and then was up in Oxford and was in London. And then he got to go with me and spend a week with me in England, which was very cool. And my son decided to be real artsy with his Instagram that week. He's like, I'm just going to take pictures of all the British doors and all the English doors that we see. And which I thought was kind of silly at first. This isn't his pictures, by the way. This is just comes from the slideshow. But which I thought was silly when he started it, and he was being kind of silly about how he did it. But it ended up being fascinating. Because England has a lot of different doors. There's just a lot of different times and architectures and periods represented in one. And then, like, when you go to Windsor Castle, it's even weirder because you've got this ancient part of the castle, and then they just kept adding parts onto it over different periods. And so the type of construction just keeps changing. So that you've got, you know, the old Gothic, and you've got these arches, and then you've got some Elizabethan and Victorian, and you've got Tudor stuff in there, and so the doors and the buildings and everything are changing. So you got one thing that was built in the 1800s, you got another one that was built in the 1300s, and you walk around, and it's fascinating. It became a fascinating exercise to look at every door and to recognize that every door existed in its own little world, its own little context, and drove you to think about how it got there, who put it there. Doors are incredibly individual. People like to express themselves oddly through these ways, and I see doors as equal to the odd choices that people make, like bumper stickers as well. A bumper sticker is a strange declaration to me. I don't have any on my car because I can't think of what I want the world to know about me if it knows nothing else about me. But some of the choices that you guys make are weird to me, right? If nobody else, if everybody in the world knows nothing about me, they're going to know that I ran a marathon. Because I'm going to put 23.8, and that's going to be the key thing I'm going to tell everybody. Or I got 3 kids, or 2 dogs, or you know, there's some data point that you're like, you know nothing about me, but this thing right here. I love the Outer Banks because I've got the OVX or whatever. And so those are weird to me, but doors are also a personal expression of who and what we are. And we saw that as we walked through England. Now, I'll share with you the coolest door story from England. We were in Oxford, right? And they were giving us the tour of Oxford. And then the guy who took us there was like, this building right here. There's a big building in Oxford. He said, this building right here was C.S. Lewis's building. So this is where C.S. Lewis did all his work. His office is right up there. If it were daytime, we might go up and look in the office. You can see where he worked. We'd gone to the Eagle and the Child to see where he and Tolkien hung out. We walked down the path, and the two of them would sit and would walk down all the time and talk about theological things, especially when Tolkien was talking to Lewis about God before Lewis was a believer. We went to all these different places to see it, and it's like, this is his office. And this is the door that he walked out every night after he routinely stayed late working in his office. And then he says, okay, now turn around. So you're standing in this doorway, and you turn around. And there's a door directly across. And he said, one night after working late, he walked out, and he saw that door. And right across this alleyway, which is probably about as wide, if I'm standing here, between me and my wife right there. So he's like, right across the alleyway, there's a big wooden door. And in the middle of the door, this very ornate carved lion head. And he said, and then he saw those columns. And surrounding on both sides of the columns were carved columns with a sculpture of a satyr at the top of it. On both sides. And so there's the satyr, there's the lion head. And he said, and then he said, look to the right. And then you look down to the right, and down this odd alleyway, in the middle of it, there's this oddly placed lamppost. Just out of nowhere, just sitting in the middle of the alley. And he said, so he saw that door, those columns, and turned to the right and saw that lamppost, and then went home that night and started writing The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Cool. Doors are weird, odd things. We can walk through them a million times and not see the same thing every time they come through. We can forget about them. They're expressions of who we are. But each single one of them is unique. So as we launch into homeschooling, We're launching through doors, our own doors here, for our own reasons. Something different led everybody in this room to this place at this moment. Is there anybody here, by show of hands, that you have never homeschooled before? This is your very first time and you're just learning about everything first. Is there anybody here like one? Yeah, go ahead, raise your hand. Yeah, okay, those two. There's nothing to be afraid of. We're not going to come to your house or anything. No pictures, please. So we have two. Okay. All right, great. All right, I want you to raise your hand if you have been homeschooling in the CC community for 1 year at least. Raise your hand up. All right, keep your hand up high if you've been in there for 2, 3, 4, 5. Sarah, get your hand up. 6, 7. 8. Mercy. 9. 10.
Wow.
11. All right, so 2. Wow. So I do that for a couple of reasons. Number one, if it's your first time and you're thinking about it, I want you to see all the people in this room that have been doing it for a long time. And you should. I encourage you. You were up until 8, right? 7. Okay, that's my wife, by the way, Tracy. So if we're at break or you have questions of people, go ask the people who have their hands up for a while and ask them questions, because they're willing to talk to you and want to talk to you and want to share what they know. But if you're first or if you've been here forever, you understand that how we all got here is different for each and every one of us. So now we're getting to a point where you get to participate for a second, where you have to participate. You don't have any choice. However, would you want to look at those two things? You either get to or you must. So here's the question that I have for you right now. Why homeschooling? What is the reason that homeschooling is important to you? You don't have to have an answer for everybody, but what does it do for you? How does it fit your family, your needs? Yes?
So originally, I was a nerd in school, graduated really top of my class, and thought, oh yeah, that's what I want to do, education, get the smarts in there. But God, I sought His heart as to why we have 4 kids. And my heart was to raise men and women of God who knew how to honor God, honor people, love each other, and walk in a manner of respect. And to me, honestly, math was secondary, although I love math. I thought, the scholastic part of it was not my aim. My aim was to build people of character.
And you have to do that intentionally, right? You can't do things important by accident. And so if you have a goal in mind, and your goal is a child, to become an adult of good character, godly character, to give the world good people, right? We'll talk about a little bit of that tomorrow as well. You're not going to get that by accident. And you can't give them to people who don't have that goal and say, I hope that comes out the way I want it to. It has to be very intentionally done with an intentional effort. That's a great reason. We're going to do this for a while, so keep going. Yes?
My son my oldest went to a private, like at a church pre-K 4, and then he went to public school in kindergarten, and he used to love school in pre-K, and then it just killed his love of learning. So we pulled him out, he was also fully in kindergarten, but we pulled him out because he asked us for 3 months straight. Every day he'd come home and say, can you homeschool me? And so we let him finish out the year, and then we started in, and my goal was I wanted to love learning because we never stopped. And so that was my goal. It was like I just want to instill that, because he started with that. He loved going to school, he loved learning all the things, and then when he went into the public system, for him it just squashed that. And so it literally took me the whole first year before he kind of started coming around and realized, no, this is a good thing and this is fun. Because to me that's paramount. Like, you have to love learning because it never stops.
Yeah, to foster a love of learning all the way through. And then he lost it. We have a fairly similar story, my wife and I. There's going to be differences, but one of them was we had different experiences in the public school system. I was an atheiist when I was younger. I was wild when I was in high school. wild all the way through my life, up until the time I became a Christian. I'm not particularly clear how unwild I am now, but it's more focused, I guess. But for me, I hated school, hated it, and did not like it at all. From the moment that we were having kids, I told my wife, who was a public school teacher, that I wanted her to homeschool our kids. She had a different experience. She was a Christian. She walked out when she was 8 years old. She was passionately in love with Christ. She saw high school as her opportunity to witness to the most diverse group of people that she'd ever have. She was using that by passing them encouraging notes, talking to them about Christ, just reaching out to people all the way through high school. She had a different, more positive experience in high school. She had friends through her high school group at her church that she liked and that were encouraging to her and that were a positive aspect in her life. My experience of the whole thing was awful, but I contributed to that mightily. I don't want to make it sound like I'm some kind of victim. The first one of my senior years, actually my first senior year in high school, I skipped like 93 of 180 days, and so surprised they didn't let me graduate. But I say this with all seriousness. I see it as an indictment on the public school system that I ever graduated at all, because I don't remember ever doing anything. I have no memory of ever having done a single thing, and yet not only did I graduate, but I got into college. Both of those things I find astonishing. So I did not want our kids ever going to school. She said, let's try it. And she's a public school teacher, or was a public school teacher at the time. And so our kids went, and they seemed to do all right, and they seemed to like it. And then all of a sudden, at 3rd grade, our son came home and said, Mom, whenever you're ready to homeschool me, I'm ready to start. And she said, why? And he said, well, I spend about 90% of my time with my head in my hands, just bored at school. And he was in Target. I mean, he was in the gifted program already. And so we thought, well, we'll see. So we went to the school to talk to his teachers to see if he was exaggerating, and they said, no, that's about right. They said he gets done with his stuff very quickly, but they said we find that helpful because we get him to help us teach the other students, since he grasped that stuff very early, and so we use him to help us teach the students that are struggling. It's like, as much as I appreciate the fact that you're using my son as free labor, it's not really why we sent him to you. This is supposed to be education. It's supposed to be his time to learn. You're supposed to be challenging and pushing it. Now, at the exact same time, my son, who was more like her, was dealing with his boredom by putting his head in his hands. My daughter, who was a year behind him in school, is in 2nd grade, MJ, is more like me. And she was getting bored, and she was starting to get into weird trouble. Weird trouble for a 2nd grader. We're getting strange complaints about her. Nothing violent or awful, but just clearly a child that was both creative and bored, trying to fill the hours of the day and coming up with strange ways to do it that were not appropriate for the school day. And so it was on that evaluation that we said, look, it's important to us, like you, that our kids love learning, value this time as education. It's not just time they're learning to get along with other kids and learning how to deal with a slow pace that just isn't meant for them. And so she brought them out of that and then set ourselves the task of homeschooling them so that we could teach them to be lifetime learners. That they would love it, find a way to help them value it, that it could be so. Because I didn't learn to love it until after I was done with it. And I was a classic autodidactic. I taught myself because I just started reading things that I loved. Even when I was in college, I would read what I had to read for college, but I always had a stack of books that I was reading on my own to find that stuff that made me passionate, that I was interested in. It was difficult for me to get through school because I just didn't feel like it was aimed at me, that I wasn't the kind of guy that it was put on, that they were trying to reach through it. And homeschooling gives you that opportunity to find a way to directly reach out to your kids and hopefully instill in them some love of learning that will last their lifetime. More. There's got to be more reasons than 2, yeah.
I want my children's education to be Christ-centered so that they don't have to learn Christ history and learn world history and try to mesh those together. That's one of the big reasons for us, so that God is in every subject. And also that my different learners are equally fulfilled and satisfied with their education.
Different learners, equally. We'll start there. We'll go to the other one. That is huge because, as I mentioned briefly a second ago, you have the opportunity through homeschooling to tailor the educational experience that your child gets to their giftings, to their abilities, to their struggles. In every single way, you can accommodate what they need to be able to go through this educational process. The school system today the modern system is an experiment. It is what it is. It's an experiment. And it's an experiment aimed at being able to educate the maximum number of people that it possibly can in a particular way. Which means whatever group you aim at, but you have to aim at some group, on either side of the curve, you're going to miss other people. So the idea is, if you look at a bell curve, that you aim it at the place where you're going to pick up the highest percentage of people, understanding that as you do it, you will lose kids at one end or the other end of the spectrum. Or kids that don't really fall into that as far as a natural or an accurate assessment of their abilities, but their abilities are just different. Right? They learn differently, think differently. When I was in Cobb County, I went to Wheeler High School, and when I got into trouble, I had to make up a lot of credits. And when you had to make up a lot of credits when you're in Cobb County, we went to a school called Oakwood. It was an open campus place. And I had heard all of these things about the people that went to Oakwood, and so I went there expecting to meet like the dregs of society. And when I found out that most of the kids who went to Oakwood were actually very artistic people. They just didn't fit into the scheme of things at a normal high school. But you went into the art room at Oakwood, and it was amazing. These kids were creating crazy stuff for high schoolers, but they were just wired differently. And they just didn't fit into the other high school system. And all the stories about them, and that they were drug addicts and criminals or whatever, it was all just nonsense. When you went and hung out with these people, they were great. They just didn't like the way the other system ran, and so they were more comfortable over here running that system. It was an opportunity for them. But you just can't make a school for every kid. But you can if you homeschool. You can make a school for every kid. Design it so that it reaches them where they are, whether they're advanced or whether they have learning issues that require different attention, or whether they have social issues, or whether they are just people who love to do homework in their pajamas all day. Whatever it is, you can tailor towards that. That's a sticking point in our house, by the way, because when I leave town to go on the road speaking, I'm well aware of the fact that my family never gets out of their pajamas some days. And I'm like, get up, get dressed, get to work kind of guy. And they're like, Dad's not here, pajamas all day. And like my daughter, I'm like, she's like, I'm like, go get ready for bed. She's like, I've been wearing pajamas all day. I was like, then you got to change pajamas. You'll sleep in the same ones that you slept in last night. I mean, there has to be some recognition that those clothes must be changed. I can't function like this. So, but you get the opportunity to tailor. The other thing is, you talked about wanting a Christ-centered education. Obviously, the modern education system is not like that. And so if it's important to you that that be the way that they understand the different subject matters, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a second here, you spend all your time at night on doing what's been done during the day. One of the things that at Practicum last week where I was speaking, someone came up to me between talks and she said, what do I tell the people that say that I'm supposed to be sending my kids to public school to be missionaries, to reach out, and I'm failing the public school system because I'm not sending my kids there to talk to them about Christ? Well, you tell those people that missionary is an adult job that God calls adults to when they're old enough to take responsibility for what they're doing with their life, that you are not to send your kids out into a world where they're ill-equipped, ill-prepared, and uneducated, and say, you go save all of those kids in a culture where they will be with them for 8 hours a day, and they're going to be with you when they're tired, cranky, and have a bunch of homework to do at night, and you have a lower ability to impact them. And I spent all of my time trying to undo the damage that the school was doing during the day. They would walk in, and the times I could sit down and talk to my kids and say, what did you learn today? The focus was bizarre. My son spent like a month researching one particular guy that, as near as I could tell, had absolutely no impact on history whatsoever. I had lived for 48 years at that point. That took us like 40 years of my life. And I had been a student of history and studied and spoken and written on all of this stuff. And I had never even heard of the guy. And they'd spent a month talking about him. It's not to say that it's not valuable to remember people that lived in the past that didn't have huge historical impacts. But a month is too much time. Because there's a lot to learn. And so I was having to teach them different things as they got home at night to try to compensate for what they weren't learning during the day. If I have something I want them to learn, I need to spend that time, that quality time with them, giving it to them then, and not having to undo what's being done when I'm not around. Anything else? Any others? Yes?
my reasons have changed over the years.
Yeah.
The core has always been more time together than more time separate. Because, you know, you get home, do homework, time for bed. I mean, there's just no time with your children.
Yeah.
Following that schedule.
Time with your kids is huge, right? This is it, right? We got one chance to be with them, these weird little people. And it's very important to me that you learn this week. They do not belong to you. They are not your property. You don't own them. They're not an extension of you. Each and every one of them are their own unique little lives. They have their own internal thought process. Even when they're young, they have an internal thought life that you don't have access to except for what they're willing to share with you. You can't know the mind of any other people. It's just a fact of life. Every single person in front of you, every person that you meet, every person that you talk to, on some level will always remain a mystery to you. Because every single one of them has their own thoughts, their own motivations, their own life going on between their ears. And your only access to it is what they choose to share with you. And that's true of your kids as it is of any person else out there. They do not exist to finish the work we failed to do. Fathers that throw their kids into baseball because they believe they would have made the majors if only their knee hadn't gone out when they were in high school or whatever, and just drive their kids into sports because they want their kids to finally complete the task of being the great athlete that they knew they could be had they just had that level of training, don't understand the responsibility of their kids. Their kids aren't here to finish their job. They're here to find their own purpose in this world. Those mothers who dress their kids up and use them as accessories to their clothing, and all of the and make them, I mean, these special little kids that go along with them that are meant to impress everybody else, where their resume is handed out like and laminated to people when you meet them, don't understand the purpose that they have in the kid's life. That kid is not there to make you look good. What that kid is a unique individual. Immanuel Kant, a philosopher, said that we ought to at all times treat other human beings as if they were ends in and of themselves and not means to somebody else's ends. Children are not a means to our ends. They are ends in and of themselves. And we are given responsibility and the privilege to work with them. God has given us the opportunity to mold them and to guide them, to shepherd them into the kind of adults that we hope that they can possibly be. But they are not ours. And we ought to treasure the time that we spend with them because as individuals, we get to see them mature and learn to talk and learn to express themselves. My 10-year-old daughter, if you met her and you talked to her for 10 minutes, you would think she is the sweetest, kindest, most loving little kid in the world. And she is. She is lovely. She is on a travel lacrosse team right now, and she frustrates her coaches because this weekend at this very intense tournament up in North Carolina, if she ran into a little girl or another girl on the opposing team fell down, she will stop playing to bend down to make sure that the girl's okay. And her coaches are screaming from the sideline, "Run! Go play!" And she doesn't care. So I'm going to make sure this little girl's okay. And I will not punish her for that. I will not correct her for that. I would much rather her care about other people than win a stupid lacrosse game. At the same time, she's salty. I mean, it's starting to show up in a way that is and much more than any of the other two, her older two siblings. And I mean, the older two have their moments. But I mean, Nika is sharp-witted, and she's got an edge. And it comes out when she makes assessments about people. The first time I noticed it was we were at the park together, and we're walking, and all of a sudden I look over, and I see this guy sitting on this bench reading a book. And he was a young guy, and this was back when man buns were the thing. And he had a man bun on his head. And internally, I start to feel something that I audibly hear. All of a sudden I hear this, "Ugh." And I look down, and it's Nika, and she elbows me, and she's like, "Man bun." I'm like, okay, let's not say that out loud, please. It's like, those are the things we keep inside. And so, but that's lovely in this sense. Not that she's like that. I mean, I just can't help it. My wife will tell you it's my fault. It's just being me. But I get to see that in her because I'm with her. When I'm in town, I get to be with my kids in a way that other fathers don't. I get to be a part of their lives. I get to have conversations with them, and I get to know the little person they are. And I find that fascinating that she is both this mix of sweet and kind and generous and loving. And at the same time, she is principled and she is certain about what she believes, and she does not suffer fools. And both of those are interesting aspects for a 10-year-old little girl to have. And I like to feed both of those because I'm not raising a wallflower. And I'm not sending her out in the world to do what other people tell her to do. I like the idea that she's got a mind of her own, that she's going to tell it. As long as she learns to do it with the gentleness and respect that we're called through Christianity and through the scriptures, and I'm good with that. But we get to know all of our kids differently because we're with them more. We should want to spend as much time with them as we possibly can. The first day we sent our kids, remember, I didn't want my kid to go to school at all. And my wife's like, okay, we're putting Peyton, when he was in kindergarten, onto the bus. I was freaking out. I don't know that bus driver. I don't know those kids on that bus. I don't know the building that they're going to, all the adults that are in there. Why are we giving our kids to strangers for 8 hours? This is nuts. This is madness. I don't know any of them. I don't trust any of them. He's my son. He ought to be here with you. And so the idea of us getting to spend time with our kids, that is a huge, huge, it won't always feel like it, right? I mean, there is what my wife refers to as the yellow bus syndrome. It does come, where it's like you see the yellow bus driving by your house, and like I could throw my kids on it and have a whole day to do whatever the cool exercise is today, right? You know, it's not yogas or Pilates or kettlebells, whatever it is everybody's doing. I'm going to go do that for like 5 hours today, and the kids are going to be gone. We all have those moments in homeschooling. You all have that time where that's something that you want to do. But I genuinely believe, as somebody who's gotten to do a lot of very cool things through ministry in this world, by the time that I die, even as now at this point as I reflect on my life that God has given me, the thing that I am most astonished and one of the most grateful things, one of the things I'm most grateful for, is that because of the nature of my job, that when I'm away, but when I'm home. And because my wife is homeschooling her kids, I will have spent more time with my kids than any other man that I know by the time that I die. And I love that. As my son is 16, he's looking at colleges now. He's going to be leaving home in 2 years. He's thinking about going to the Naval Academy or West Point or these different schools he's talking about. He's leaving. And I already feel it. I already feel him going. But part of that feeling isn't just because my son's leaving, but he's my friend. I don't mean that in the sense of we're buddies. I mean, I'm his dad. He would set you straight if you tried to say, I mean, dad is dad. But we spend a lot of time together, and we've talked about a lot of things. Last week we drove to Florida together for a tournament. We spent 8 hours on the road, hours in the hotel, sat around over meals talking to each other. Me and that young man have spent hours and hours hanging out with each other and talking to each other. I like him. I really enjoy his company. He's one of the few people in this world that I can hang around that much and not eventually be like, okay, I'm going to read my blog, bye. I enjoy him. And the same way with my daughters. I got to spend Father's Day weekend with my 2 daughters up in North Carolina. I drive them up there. I got to eat dinners with them. I get to sit in a room. And I love those girls. They're cool. They're fun. They're exciting. Spending time with our kids is a tremendous blessing that homeschool gives us that other people would just give away. That, look, I get it. It fits their family or they think that's best, but I just can't imagine it. I can't imagine other people getting more time with my kids than I get. I love the fact that I got the most of them. And now that even as they're getting older, like 14 and 16-year-old Watts kids, they want to see their friends more. And we have to let them. My wife and I are like, okay, you let them go. It's because it's a part of them growing up is they've got to start that process of being on their own. But the first time I walked into Quick Trip without my son, the lady behind the counter said, "Where is he?" I was like, "Yeah, he chose to go off with his friends." And she's just like, "Sorry, Dad." You know, it's natural, it's okay. And that's for like 5 minutes I'm there almost weeping with the lady in Quick Trip. Like, just commiserating. She's like, "He is a great kid. I love him. He's great and he's leaving me." So spending time with him is huge. Any more?
Freedom.
Huh?
Freedom.
Freedom. Please, more.
Freedom to choose curriculum, freedom to
That's huge. Yeah, freedom to have your schedule, right? And to make audibles during the day. Yeah, the yellow bus syndrome is a terrible thing, right? So that's why we have PE. In our household, it's like, let's go play lacrosse in the field for a while. It's a legitimate part of school. Let's go run and just burn ourselves out in the field. Or let's call other people up and meet them. Or let's do a field trip. Let's go somewhere else today. We don't have to fight against a schedule. We can amend the schedule. My son can just go to England for a week. I mean, my son got to tour Blenheim for a whole day, Winston Churchill's home where he was born into and grew up in. If you haven't seen Blenheim, look it up online. It's astonishing, the world that Winston Churchill grew up in. But it's also, you see the grounds and you walk around it, and you see the statues and there's history. And then where did they get their money from? This great general that was a relative, and you see how the library and all of that. Or we got to walk through London and see all the different things there. Or we were out at Windsor Castle. We got to tour Parliament because a friend of ours was friends with a guy that was in Parliament. And so we got a private tour of Parliament. And got to see where all of this stuff goes on. That's educational, but you can't do that if you have to go ask somebody else for permission to take your kids somewhere. Or my kids get to go with me on trips where I go speak sometimes, and they get to sit in the audience. And I talk about them a little less, whichever kid is in the audience that day, than I normally do. But they get to hear my presentation, see me interact with people. As a matter of fact, after two of them saw me multiple times when we came home, like, Daddy, you're much nicer with those kids in the audience asking questions while you're on the road than you are here. It's like on the road, they ask you questions. You're like, that's a great question. Let's talk about that for a minute. And you unpack it for them, and no matter what they ask, you're so polite and you're so loving. We ask you questions around the house, you're like, that's just dumb. Again, that's what I'm thinking when those people ask me those questions in the audience, but I've got to convince them they're wrong. And so I can't start off with that. But you guys get to know the real Daddy. And so you get that freedom to be able to just give them what they need at that moment. And sometimes what they need is not school. That's a need that kids have sometimes. And I don't like having to ask other people to be able to do things with my kids. Look, I'm the parent. You're just the school. I remember when I went to pick up my son years ago to take him to a movie when he was in school. I think he was in third grade. There was this look on their face like, why are you getting him? I was like, why do you care? It's none of your business what I'm doing with my son. I'm coming to take him from you to take him someplace where I want him to go with me. And that's all you need to know. I don't have to explain myself to you. I don't want to explain myself to you. I'm not interested in asking for your permission at this moment. He's not yours. So I'm Dad. He goes with me. Yes, ma'am.
I agree with a lot of things people have said for why we homeschool, but also there is a selfish aspect to it where I just enjoy getting to teach them and getting to be exposed to the things that I didn't know before, or get to share the things that I've learned with them.
That's huge.
And that fulfills me in a special way too.
Yeah, it does. My brother-in-law is one of my brother-in-laws is an incredibly successful guy. I mean, just crazy rich. And he and my wife were sitting around talking one day about that process as a parent, right, of being lead learner in the household and all the things. And he, as he was listening to Tracy talk about it, he said, "That is so cool. I wish I was doing that. I wish I was going back and restudying everything again." And having that opportunity to pass that on to the kids and having that opportunity to teach them. He said, I wish that was what I was doing right now. He would give all that other stuff up to have that opportunity to go through it again because he loved learning. We talked about that lifetime love of learning. He loved it. And he wanted to be able to do more of it and to focus more of that. It is, you're right, it's a cool thing to be the lead learner in the house because it drives you back to education and to relearn things, and to remind yourself of things. I have to read things for my own work over and over and over again because I find that if I read something one time, I thought I understood it. When I read it the second time, I notice things that I never noticed before. I read it the third time, and I realize that thing that I thought of, actually this guy told me, and I forgot that he's the one that told me. And I start to see that as I look through, and just every exposure to it changes my understanding of the material. And as a teacher, because that's all I do for a living. People think I argue for a living. I'm actually just teaching people how to think about very particular subject matters. And by constantly having to learn the subject matters myself and relearn them over and over again, it's an incredibly rewarding opportunity for the teacher. It does. I agree. I personally love it. All right. Anything else? Several. All right. Yeah. Hands up. Yeah.
Okay.
You go first.
Okay.
Okay.
So
just in that same vein, and it's shifted. Someone else had said that it had shifted, like the reason why, and I think our foundational reason was just for the Lord. But in the past couple years, our oldest is he has dyslexia and dysgraphia, and so that's a whole other journey that we did not plan on taking. But so he is going into Times 1. He'll be a sophomore, but we decided to wait a year. But just as I've learned more about challenge, just what you were talking about, the lead learner, that was eye-opening for me. A couple years ago, I finally read the core, and Lee Bortons was talking about how it's important for our children to watch us struggle through learning algebra or biology or whatever it is, and that they need to see that example that we're not like, oh, I'm not an expert in this, or that we just don't flee when all of a sudden we're faced with something difficult. They see us press through, and
and by seeing you, so you're talking about the importance of them seeing you struggle to get the material, to master the material, so that you can pass it on to them. Also, that teaches them something about the importance of the material. If they see you striving, working, effort, if they see all that going in, it really does communicate the importance of it, right? I mean, and I don't mean that if you like, sitting around watching TV, I'm not totally condemning you with this statement, but if they see you sitting around all the time just watching TV and have no interest in the things that they're actually doing, then they're not actually seeing you commit to that, right? I mean, my kids see how much my wife does to make homeschool happen, not just in our house, but in the community. They see how much investment of energy is going into that, and that communicates the importance of it to them. And also, I do like the point as well that, especially as we talk about math, one of the things that I fight against when I work with people is, just because you can't do something immediately doesn't mean you're stupid. I mean, one of the reasons people struggle with math is they got this impression that if they don't immediately understand it, it is somehow an indictment upon them, which is complete and total nonsense. It doesn't make any sense at all. It's because they've watched too many TV shows where these fictional characters are naturally gifted at everything they do, and all of these fictional abilities that people have as far as intellectual abilities, by the way, none of them are true. There aren't people like that in the world, and the few people that are mathematically inclined like that can be counted on your fingers and toes throughout all of history. But they would have you believe, if you watch television, they're happening all the time. And so there's this idea that they give when they struggle with something that I'm just not inclined for it, I'm not built for it, it's not me, or I'm dumb. And I have to tell people when they get a math problem wrong, and I can see a little part of their body die as they're up at the board getting it wrong, so what? It's a math problem. That's just a puzzle with numbers. It's not that big a deal that you failed to get it right the first time that you did it, or anything else like that. Sometimes information just comes harder. And sometimes you can be good at one thing and not good at another. But my kids are incredibly gifted at math, but they're not great at time tests. Like, if you time a test and make them do it fast, they're just not good at that. But they can do complex stuff, but they feel stupid when they can't do time tests. Then don't ever do a stupid time test. There will never be a time in your life where somebody's going to throw a sheet of paper at you and then just start a stopwatch like, go, go, go. It's not a practical skill. Just acknowledge, I'm just not good at that, and move on with your life. All right, we got time for maybe one more. Yes, ma'am.
Finances are huge in our house.
Yes.
And I like the idea of a private Christian school. It's never an option. I was homeschooled. I can't stand the thought of a public school educating my children. And so I'm really thankful for Cece's option for moms to get involved as a tutor. I tutored last year, and that was the only reason we were allowed to be in CC, was because I could pay for my children being in CC as a tutor. And that was so just life-changing for us to know that I can be involved, I can be with them all day, immerse myself in the curriculum more than I ever would have if I hadn't been a tutor. And it was basically a wash. I was really thankful for that.
But you saw my wife nodding her head along. Again, we work in ministry, so we're not rich. That's what we do as well. We use it as an opportunity for just to be involved in a community, but that involvement in the community makes it possible to do things that we weren't if we weren't otherwise involved in the same way. It opens up opportunities and a great educational opportunity for us. So absolutely. By the way, just to be cautious when you're talking to development people, finances are huge, can be taken multiple different ways. So, like, finances are huge in our house. I'm like, we need to talk about you as a donor then, because if you have huge finances, I'm just kidding. I'm just messing. No, no, I understand exactly what you mean. Finances are an important issue and focus in our house as well. So don't take it seriously. I'm just being mean. Okay. How much time do you want me to do it?
We're good. If
You would love to sign it?
I'll make you say that too.
All right. then let's take a break right now.
Awesome. Okay, we are going to have our first bookstore break, and then if you guys can make your way back in here at 10:45, we'll have Jay get started. But Cindy is going to come up. She's going to make an announcement and introduce herself. Cindy is our new PSS, our product support specialist. Excellent. Come on up, Cindy.